So back in June, shortly after the Brexit referendum, the European Parliament immediately said, hurry up and leave. They wanted us to leave as quickly as we could, with a majority of lawmakers voting in an emergency session to approve a non-binding resolution that asks Britain to set the clock ticking as soon as possible on the legal process that would lead to the withdrawal from the European Union. And don't get me wrong, it was to their advantage to demand this. I mean, it would have put Britain on the back foot, and it would have given them more of an upper hand in the negotiations. Before the vote, there was a furious exchange that included a prolonged booing of Nigel Farage, the leader of the UK Independence Party, who castigated fellow members of the European Parliament. He said that many of the lawmakers had never held a proper job in their lives. By August, it was clear that Theresa May was in no hurry to make Brexit happen. She wanted to do it on her terms and her timeline. And don't get me wrong, this is why I thought Theresa May was good for this job. And honestly, I still think she probably will do a fine job with the negotiations. Whoever's advising her on that has done a good job. Whoever was advising her on her domestic campaign was terrible, but they have actually been removed. So one of the reasons this was going to take so long is that they had to create two new ministries, one for Brexit and one for international trade, and they didn't have enough qualified personnel and weren't sure exactly what they were supposed to negotiate. And Juncker obviously chimed in with, well, we knew all along that Brexit supporters didn't really have a plan. Merkel was actually a lot more restrained than most, because Merkel is actually a statesman, rather than Juncker being just some fucking ideologue who wants to unite Europe under his personal purview. In particular, France had been desperate to get Britain out of the EU, presumably so they didn't have to worry about their old, tough, scary boyfriend getting a bit jealous of us hanging around. So one of the reasons that the EU wants Britain out so quickly is because if we were to wait until October 2017, until after the national elections of Germany and France, well, we know how France went, so that's not a problem for them. Leaving would get more complicated. Elections for the European Parliament would be scheduled for May or June 2019, and if Britain still hasn't left the EU by then, it would have to participate. So Farage could be the negotiator, and he could be an MEP that we send there. It's going to really piss them off. The Brits on their way out would still have a seat and a vote when the next EU Commission was chosen and nominated in the fall of 2019. That year, the very latest, EU holds budget talks for the period until 2027. In theory, Britain would still have to take part in the negotiations, even if the country plans to stop its annual net contribution of about 8.5 billion euros. Basically, we can make their lives difficult, which is why they want to get us out of the door as quickly as possible, and because it's more advantageous for them if they do it quickly while we are unprepared. When last September rolled around, they kept going on. They were insistent that Theresa May hurry up. Apparently we need to accept the 4 pillars of the single market, even though not everyone does accept the 4 pillars of the single market. But again, it's something that they want to expand rather than contract, so it's natural that they will want to push this. Former Italian Prime Minister Mario Monti warned that giving Britain a full Monti deal without free movement of labour, as in refusing one of the 4 pillars of the European single market, could destroy the single market as other nations demanded special treatment in certain areas as well. Well, other nations are actually getting special treatment, but like I said, it's something they want to rescind rather than increase. It of course means that Northern Ireland is a problem, and that the border between Ireland and the Republic remains open and unfortified, and no one wants a return to the 80s and 90s. So, yeah, I imagine that's something that's going to happen regardless. And then we come to today, where the EU is to delay Brexit talks by a year due to Theresa May's negotiating stance. So, by complete accident, by being broadly incompetent on domestic policy, Theresa May has actually blundered into 4-dimensional chess and received exactly what she wanted, even though she didn't really receive exactly what she wanted. It seems that the UK election itself has made them reconsider their plans, and I love the fact that we're putting them into chaos. The Brexit negotiations could be delayed for a year after the European Union will draft a new mandate for Chief Negotiator Barnier if Theresa May insists on discussing a new trade relationship at the same time as Britain's divorce bill. Senior sources for the bloc said that they have put on hold the talks, which were due to commence on the 19th of June, while they restructure their plans, because these people are meticulous. They can't stand not having a plan. And that was one of their major criticisms of Britain and Theresa May and the Conservatives, or Cameron and the Conservatives, that they had put forward the referendum for Brexit, not really planning for the outcome that Britain would leave, because I don't think anyone thought it was going to happen. They'd been planning phased negotiations, and then since we've basically refused that and tried to press against that at every turn, Theresa May was trying to negotiate before the actual general election as well. Juncker urged Britain to strike a deal with their European counterparts. Shortly after it emerged that Theresa May's Conservative Party had lost their majority, he tweeted, "We don't know when the Brexit talks start. We know when they must end. Do your best to avoid a no deal as a result of no negotiations. Because we know that the EU wants Britain to be kept under European courts, and that is undoubtedly something that they are going to press for strongly in the negotiations. They want us to pay off our obligations to Brussels, obviously, the 100 billion euros, remain subject to the courts and continue to let relatives of European immigrants settle in the UK. These are not things that the British public wants." These demands were contained in a paper seen by Reuters that outlined the key negotiating guidelines for Barnier. Now, this is going to change, obviously, which is why they want another year to see what they can do. But these were the things that they wanted out of us. And these are things that we didn't want to give up either. So with the question of what kind of Brexit are we going to have, I mean, there's this article that suggests that there's no soft Brexit, and it does not exist as a serious or credible option. This article was written by Martin Howe, a leading barrister in the fields of intellectual property and EU law. He was called to the bar in 1978 and became a QC in 1996, and he is the chairman of Lawyers for Britain. He says that it is a total myth that the UK would be economically better to stay inside the customs union and or single market, and that it is only a pointless ideology or obsession with curbing immigration at all costs which accounts for the government's rejection of these options. In addition, an ill-thought-out notion is gaining ground that post-Brexit membership of the customs union or the single market in some way represents a soft Brexit, which is a concession to the wishes of those who vote to remain, as compared to the supposedly damaging hard Brexit. Apparently, post-exit membership of the EU internal market and of the customs union would put us in a limbo land, where we would be the rule takers, bound by huge restrictions on our economic and political freedom of action, according to rules on which we would no longer have a vote, and could be altered seriously to our disadvantage in the future. Since we would no longer have a vote on the internal markets or financial services, we would be powerless to prevent them from being changed even further to the disadvantage of our financial services industry in the city and other major centres such as Edinburgh. Now, this is interesting because it's not like the French haven't tried this before. Under Sarkozy, we would be totally prevented from undertaking supply-side reforms of the regulatory burdens imposed on our domestic economy by international trade or by the EU internal market rules. We would be required to submit our laws to being automatically overturned by rulings from the EFTA court, which simply shadows the ECJ. The customs union membership would oblige us to continue to charge high tariffs on the type of goods which we have no UK industry to protect, for the sole advantage of producers in EU states. British consumers would pay the cost of tariffs through higher prices, and we would have to continue to hand over to Brussels 75% of the tariffs borne by our consumers. Even more catastrophically, customs union membership would totally prevent us from entering into trade agreements with non-EU countries, who now represent 55% and growing of our export markets. On the other side of the ledger, the supposed economic advantages of customs union and internal market membership are grossly oversold. The tariff-free trade between the UK and EU can continue after Brexit under a free trade arrangement, which preserves our ability to decide our own levels of external tariffs and to reach trade agreements with non-EU countries. Modern friction-free and virtual border customs arrangements can easily ease the flow of goods at channel ports and avoid the need for physical customs posts on the Northern Ireland land border, and mutual recognition of standards based on a starting point where we are in line with the EU internal market rules can ease the flow of goods and services between us and the EU after Brexit. The idea that single market membership would somehow be easier to negotiate than a free trade agreement is another total myth. If the UK wanted to belong to the single market after the EU exit, we would simply need to apply to join the European Economic Area Agreement as a non-EC member. This is what Norway has done, basically. As far as I'm aware, they have access to the single market, and they do have to accept the free movement of goods, services, labour, and workers or whatever. But they aren't part of it, and they get to decide. In order to join the EEA, we'd need the consent of all 30 states, the EU members plus Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein, all of whom would need to ratify the necessary treaty changes in accordance to their respective national constitutional requirements. This is actually a bigger barrier than what is needed to secure a free trade agreement with the EU. And I think it's worth noting that if we didn't end up with a free trade agreement, then we would still be trading under World Trade Organization rules, which is something like 2.5% tariff or something. So it's not the end of the world. The reality is there is no soft Brexit. It does not exist as a serious or credible option. Halfway house arrangements in which we are subject to EU rules but have no say in setting them are the worst of all worlds and would continue to subject us to all the disadvantages of EU membership but not give us the freedom and opportunities of leaving the EU in shaping our laws, controlling our borders and taking advantage of global trading opportunities. The only softness is in the heads of the people who advocate such half-baked and ill-thought-out notions. And this is very interesting, especially when you compare what he said there to what Daniel Hannan has said.
Globalised world, and for you to say that 90% of the economy doesn't rely on the European Union, isn't that a bit disingenuous when we live in such a globalised world where the economy is so interlinked with others? I mean, the financial crisis in 2008 didn't start in Britain, it started in America, and do you not accept that our economy really does rely on other countries, i.e. the European Union, our biggest trading partners, to run effectively, to run efficiently, to run at maximum growth? And shouldn't we be part of a trade union to help Britain's economy grow faster?
We should have free trade with everyone, including with our allies in Europe.
But you want to stop that. You want to leave the European Union. You want to take us out of the single market.
Well, I want us to have free trade with Europe in the way that every geographically European country does, regardless of whether or not it's in the EU. I mean, apart from Belarus, every country in Europe has tariff-free trade with the EU. You know, Macedonia, Montenegro, Isle of Man, Switzerland, Andorra, Norway, Serbia, they all do. And I think, I've not heard anyone here in the European Parliament or anyone in Brussels or anyone in the other 27 national capitals seriously suggesting that there should be tariffs or trade barriers between Britain and the rest of the EU. So I just think that's a non-issue.
You don't see that happen? You see that impossible, never going to happen?
The chances of it happening are 1 in 1,000, because literally no one is suggesting it. And I don't know why some of the Remain media in the UK keep on fretting about it when no one is putting it on the table at all. But like I say, we have got huge opportunities vis-a-vis the rest of the world. We have no trade deals in place with the biggest economies on the planet and the fastest growing ones, with the United States, with Canada, with China, with India, with Australia. And here we have the opportunity to do something big and bold and beautiful. We can become the first G7 country properly to open our economy, including in food and textiles and all the usually difficult areas. We can do something much more along the lines of what New Zealand has done, or Hong Kong, or whatever. But whereas they are relatively small populations, we're the 5th biggest economy in the world. And if we did the same thing, that wouldn't just be good for us, it would lift the entire world economy.
And that does seem rather important, given how we are aware that when Brexit actually happens and we actually leave, everyone is going to take a big economic hit. As the IFS predicted, we're going to see 5.5% of our GDP sliced off if we don't have a deal. And the same sort of thing will happen in Europe. It won't be to that extent, obviously, but it's going to be a severe economic hit for Europe as well. It's in everyone's interests to have a free trade deal, so we're going to end up with a free trade deal. And it's important to remember that we are currently financially worse off than we were, even though this is an impact that's going to hit us a bit further down the road. And again, this is something we knew was going to happen. We knew it was going to cost us money. Everyone knew. And apparently Europe will face severe consequences from a hard Brexit, according to the chief negotiator. What he means by a hard Brexit is if Britain leaves without a deal. But again, this is really the terms need to be retired, or at least redefined, defined correctly even, because this is driving me crazy. It's so difficult to try and talk to people. Barnier said in the Financial Times that he wants an orderly withdrawal and hopes for an ambitious free trade agreement. Of course he does. That's beneficial for everyone. Nobody wants no deal. Nobody wants no deal. The reason Theresa May is saying that she will accept no deal is to be a hard ass. It's something she's going to walk back on the second she gets into the negotiating room, as long as they agree to a deal that Britain wants. A good deal for us. As long as they don't sit there and think that they're going to play hardball, that means that we don't have to play hardball either. And playing hardball for us is damaging in the short term but more tenable in the long run, whereas it's the opposite for the European Union. And but it's exactly as Merkel has said. She knows that we can undercut them on regulation and influence business to come here by offering a more profitable option. And Jeremy Corbyn's position on this is infuriating. It's absolutely infuriating. The whole purpose of us deregulating to encourage business here is to increase the prosperity of the country. If business come here, that creates jobs. If business comes here, that creates jobs. Creating jobs puts money in people's pockets. People with money in their pockets can be taxed without having to raise the tax rate. If more people have more money, then more taxes will be gathered for the social services that Jeremy Corbyn wants to preserve. This is a win-win for everyone. If we play our cards right, we can do very well. If an idiot like Jeremy Corbyn gets into power, we will find ourselves not doing well. It is important that these things go ahead, and go ahead sensibly. And so it is honestly, I know that a lot of people have been calling for May to leave, but I don't know if she should. I mean, there's been loads of petitions. This is just one of many petitions. Force Theresa May to resign and allow Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. Awful. Awful. He will increase business taxes. He will disincentivize businesses from coming here, from increasing and propping up our economy by creating new jobs, to get more people into employment, to create more taxpayers and higher taxpayers. Because again, it's all about supply and demand. The more jobs you have in this country and the less people applying for those jobs, the more those jobs are worth to the person who gets the job, the more money they end up getting. This is basic stuff. You can read this, you can read exactly the process of this in The Wealth of Nations, which I have actually recently been reading. And Jeremy Corbyn doesn't seem to have any idea how this works. He doesn't understand that the more people paying taxes, the more tax revenue you have at the end of it, and so the less you actually need to penalise businesses and people in general to generate the same revenues to protect the social services. I can't understand this man at all. I can only assume that he doesn't understand economics, presumably because he's got a fucking communist as his economics minister. But apparently, Boris Johnson is going to back Theresa May, from what we know from leaked WhatsApp messages, telling everyone to calm down, stay with Theresa May. And David Davis says that replacing Theresa May would be the height of self-indulgence. So it looks like Theresa May will be negotiating Brexit. But also, Nigel Farage might be there as well. So who knows? This might actually turn out pretty good. But again, this isn't a prediction, because God knows, something crazy might happen tomorrow. Ultimately, the only real losers from this could be the EU, and that's only because they've made their beds. They've bound their hands, and now they're complaining that, well, other people will want to leave and get a good deal from us. Well, maybe if you weren't so awful to be within, they wouldn't want to leave and get a good deal. They'd be happy in there. So I don't shed a single tear.